Welcome, friends. I think this is our second, maybe second or third of our uh, second of our quarterly stewardship webinar that we're starting to do to talk about stewardship more regularly in our synods. And Northwest Minnesota is now kind of co-leading these with us and joining us. So we're glad to have you all. And Tim Brown, my friend, is going to give us all the brilliance that he has to solve all of our problems.
Well, under promise, overperform,
Yes.
if that's the hope. So no assured brilliance, but I do, if we can, want it to be as interactive as possible. So even though if you may not want your face on screen, that's totally great. But you can feel free to come off of mute and answer questions. If you don't mind your face on screen, it's great to always see you as well. And I can certainly answer my own questions too after I pose them. But really great to be with you. My name is Tim Brown. I'm the Director of Congregational Stewardship for the ELCA. I've been a pastor for many moons since 2009 now. I served parishes in Chicago and now recently in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I currently live. And I will be with y'all up there in Eastern North Dakota for the Senate Assembly this year. Really looking forward to being there and doing that and doing some stewardship stuff with you when I'm up there. The title of this webinar was making the offering the highlight of the liturgy, and I think that that's an overpromise for sure. But I can say that we can make it one of the high points of the liturgy. Obviously, the highlight of the liturgy is the meal, always the word as well. But we're going to talk about how the offering or the giving thanks portion of the liturgy connects those two and why it's so important, and why I think that some of the practices that we've adopted, especially since the pandemic, need to be thought again. And it doesn't mean you need to necessarily change what you do, but you need to be intentional in knowing why you do what you do. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And Aaron, if it's okay, I'll start sharing my screen. Is that fine? All right. Can we see my screen? Should see making the offering a high point in the liturgy, right? Say
Yep.
that. Cool. Awesome. All right, just a little bit more about me. I'm a father and husband. My son Alistair just turned 10 over the weekend on Friday. He's a soccer fan. My son Finley is 11, and he is a big baseball fan. And my wife Rhonda is a molecular biologist. She works at William Peace University as professor of biology, anatomy, physiology, all of those good things that have to do with the human body. That's her purview. Um, and so I take the other half of that coin, right? All the theological things come on my desk. The ennui, and the eschatological nightmares. I am a writer. I write for a couple of outlets pretty regularly, and then I also write and blog online as well. My particular niche or interest that I do as a hobby and write about for myself are the lives of the saints. And speaking of the Deaconess Society, the Deaconess Association, do we know whose Saint Day it is today? Anybody?
Yes, only because I saw it on your social media that it is Saint Lydia and Phoebe.
It is Saint Lydia, Saint Phoebe, and Saint Dorcas. Yes, all three of the what I call prelude saints or longstanding saints of the church. And yeah, if you're curious about them, you can follow me on social media, or you can follow my blog, Reluctant Christian, and I write about saints just about every day. Um, I am an occasional slow runner. It's one of my hobbies also is running. I am signed up for a half marathon again this year. Probably will do a number of 5Ks, flirting with a marathon, but we'll see what the training allows us to do. And then I try as best I can to live a generous life. And I'm pretty curious about what makes us generous. But this is an answer, or this is a question for everybody in the room who's willing to come off mute. At least you don't have to come on camera, but come off mute. And my question for you is, what is your first memory of the offering in worship?
My first remembrance of offering would be during Sunday school.
Okay, tell me more.
It was always a big part of the morning, and we, sang a joyous song after we had received it, and we've incorporated that into our own Sunday school with our own children now.
Cool. Yeah, and usually you had little envelopes probably that had 50 cents or a dollar maybe or something like that in it.
I think
Or
way
maybe
back in
you
my day, it was probably a quarter.
a quarter, right? Or
In
you had
my,
the little churches. Do you remember the little
Oh,
little
yes,
oh
we had
yeah,
those.
oh
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, little
In my
boxes?
day it was a little offering envelope, and I had always $1 in it.
Great.
So I was
Excellent.
a big generous person compared to my friend
Yeah.
Jamie.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it
He's
makes it
older than I am, so maybe
you
that's
go.
why.
makes an
Quarter is
impression
different.
though, right? Makes an impression. I see
Mhm.
some other folks have dared to come off anonymity and be on camera. First memories of the offering.
I don't know if this was my first memory, but the first thing that popped in my head was like, right, getting the dollar from my parents right before the offering and getting to put my own, I mean, their money, right? But getting to put money in the offering. Like they always gave each of us $1 or whatever they had in their pocket. So we all could put money in the offering plate too.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have a follow-up question to that in just a second, Deacon. But anybody else want to share a first memory of the offering?
I guess I would echo some of that, but I remember those little envelopes and that it was important, I think particularly to my mother, that we would get our offering ready ahead of time. So, um, right on that little envelope what we were doing, and we were responsible to put it in our pockets and bring it with us. And then during worship time is when I remember that offering. Um, and I thought that was pretty neat to be able to put my offering in with everybody else.
Yeah.
It felt grown up.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And it's Nate, right?
Nate, yep,
Thank you,
yep.
Nate. Yeah. So, Aaron, quick follow-up on that, Deacon. And this kind of goes with one of my other questions, but I'll ask it now. Did your parents ever talk to you about how they got that offering money?
No.
Okay. They never talked about where it came from or anything like that.
Mm-mm.
Okay, yeah,
We're
cool.
we're Scandinavian North Dakota. We don't talk about money and faith. Just kidding. I
At
mean
least
that,
not
really that right? That is my like growing up, that is true.
at least not willingly, right?
Yeah.
Well, this leads to another question, which is right there. So, when you were younger churchgoer, where did you think the offering went? Where did it go?
Into the offering plate.
Right.
Yeah.
Really, I never thought any further.
Yeah. You probably never thought any further, and honestly, you probably were never told any further. Yeah. Uh, did your parents or pastors ever say the offering was going to be used for anything in particular? Do you remember any stories of that? I'll take silence as a no, probably. I
Well,
mean, go
I
ahead,
was
Nate.
thinking, I was thinking because I had to kind of remember. I know that I have a memory of, missionaries visiting our congregation and having some sense that maybe the offerings went to help them.
Mhm.
Um, my parents were both involved in leadership in our congregation. I mean, in lay leadership. So I guess I probably had a sense that we were paying bills of some kind anyway, to take care of a building and that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, no, thanks. That's helpful. Well, and special appeals are usually what people remember the most, right? When you have a visit from somebody or somebody made a special appeal for a particular offering. Yeah. Um, and then this is just a functional thing. How is the offering collected?
Passing the plate around
Passing the plate around. Very good. Yeah.
for
Thank
the
you.
ushers.
Thank you. Yes, the ushers, the very powerful ushers.
I remember being captivated at how they did it because it was clear they were skipping like every other pew, and I just would analyze, okay, now where is he going to put that? Why did he skip that pew? Oh, then it came down that way. I
Yeah,
just
they
remember being
spread the pews, right?
yeah, just captivated by like as a 6 year old, just wow, these guys must be the smartest people in church that they don't even think about it. They just do it.
Threading the pews and counting the heads as they were doing so. Yeah.
Yeah, they seem to be really almost like rehearsed. Like I don't know how to describe it, but they were very like admirable in what they were doing. They looked admirable because they were the people that did the ushering, and they just knew how they knew how to do it best, I guess.
I like what you say there, and it's Heidi, right?
Yeah, yep.
Thank you, Heidi. Only because it's one of these callbacks that we remember this. For a lot of folks, I remember when when I was old enough to usher. I think I was 13, and my father made me wear a suit coat to usher, and I was too small for his, but I had to wear his. It was the only one I had at that time, and I just remember being swallowed in this suit coat. But it's one of these things where you tried to be dignified or show some importance of some sort as what was going around. I mean, the reason I ask these questions is because when people are experiencing the offering today, or even not experiencing the offering today, they're experiencing with all of this stuff that's come before. And if you were kind of confused about something as a kid, or if questions were never answered, or you never thought about it as a kid, chances are you still don't have any answers, or you are probably confused even now. Because one of the things that we haven't done a good job at is making the bridge between the practices that were and the practices that are. And this is something we can repair, and we can do it now in the liturgy. Actually, the liturgy invites us to do it. Because the offering is something that shows up all throughout the scriptures, and is certainly something that's not, it's not, you have to do it in the liturgy. It's not optional. So where's the offering in the Bible? Well, there's tons. It's First Chronicles, there's Acts, there's Hebrews, there's Deuteronomy. It's all throughout the Gospels. We're talking about people giving of their time, their talents, their treasures, all those sorts of things up to God. And that's just the New Testament. We haven't even talked about the Hebrew Scriptures. And in the Hebrew Scriptures, and in Jewish tradition, the offering had three primary functions. This is really kind of, I think, key. The first is and it was called the carbonate, by the way. That's the Hebrew transliteration. It functioned in three primary ways. The first one, you gave an offering to give a renunciation. The renunciation is, the world tells me that I need this much money to live, and I tell the world, you don't know me. God has given me more than enough, and I don't need everything you tell me. And if you think about this, especially now, even in today's context, I mean, beloved, how many zeros is enough at the end of your bank account number? Is there a number? We live in a world that tells us there's not. But we live in a faith that tells us, yeah, there's such thing as enough. Where is it? For the ancient Jewish people, the giving of the offering was a renunciation. The world tells me I need this much, and I tell you, you don't know me. I live in a different existence than that. The second reason for the offering in the Hebrew Scriptures, our Jewish brothers and sisters, this is pre-Second Temple Judaism, is that the offering was a substitution. And it's a substitution you would think of for sins or wrongs done. And while Lutherans reject this idea, we can't pay for sins. Obviously, Luther really fought hard for us to get out of that sort of mindset. I do know that there are some folks, and even myself, who give to certain causes because of certain things that have happened in our lives. I have a friend who in high school was a bully and picked on a lot of kids. And he picked on a lot of kids for the way they acted, the way they dressed, made a lot of assumptions about them. And every year he gives a big donation to the Trevor Project. And I asked him one time why this was one of his favorite charities. And he said, I treated a lot of people horribly as a kid. And I know I can never make up for that, but I can try to ensure that other kids have safe places to go, safe places that I didn't afford them. This is a substitution. And then the third way, which I think is really telling, is that you give an offering because it's a means of drawing close to that you support. They would give an offering to God because it drew them closer to God. Notice that amount isn't necessary or a part of it. It's the act of giving something. And you're like, yeah, Tim, I don't know if that's true. Well, beloved, in just T-minus 20 days, we're about to do that when a bunch of you will give flowers to somebody to draw close to them and give your thanks for them. I mean, we do this all the time. I think that the church can reclaim these three ways and use these as discipleship tools to reteach one of the primary ways that we understand our relationship with one another, with the church, and with God. Reclaiming these ways. The offering, I think, does this still, if we practice it, if we teach it, if we disciple it in this way. That was the Hebrew scriptures. Any thoughts or any questions? I'm going to come off share just to offer this as a time, or anything with that. Let me ask it this way. For how many of you is this a new way of thinking about the offering?
I'll come off mute here. My name is Carmen. I sorry, I was about 10 minutes late, so I might have missed an introduction.
You're fine, Carmen. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. My name is Carmen. Actually, my giving involvement as an adult started with giving of time. My husband and I didn't have a whole lot of money, but felt it was important to give or give back. And like you referred to other charities, like that was our way of stepping up to give what we couldn't, to give in other ways because our pockets weren't full to be able to give as much as we wanted. So this was our way of sharing our means in other fashions.
Thank you, Carmen. Yeah. Notice, by the way, that when I was talking about the giving of the offering, I never said giving of money.
Nope. I noticed you even said time.
Yeah. And that's not to downplay the piece or part that monetary giving has. It certainly is a big part of it. But we have to remember that stewardship is a life thing, not a pocketbook thing. It's a life thing. It's how we live our life. And I mean, I've identified 10 realms of stewardship, and we can do another webinar on that if you want to, or another time. But this idea, though, that it's a life thing, and in giving up, right? I mean, it's one of the things that the Hebrew scriptures thought was so important that they put it in the 10 Commandments. You have to give up a day. That's what the Sabbath is. There are ways that we can talk about the offering that talk about our whole lives together, including our pocketbooks. They're all moral documents. Your checkbook's a moral document. Your mouth is a moral instrument. Your hands are a moral instrument. Your calendar is a moral document. All of these things are offering related. So that's kind of the Hebrew scriptures. I'm going to talk about the New Testament and in the church after, all right? About how the offering has been placed. And by the way, you can lead your congregation through this, your communities of faith, talking about these things. It can happen. This could be a whole discipleship course. All right. So the offering in the Didache, you guys know what the Didache is? It's the very first church is the Didache, and we have this kind of compendium of writings that happened out of the very first church. And in the Didache, they mention the offering a couple of times. They talk about it being a tithe for the Lord. And this is one of the first teachings on this. Every first fruits, therefore, the products, the winepress, the threshing floor, the oxen, the sheep, not just monetary things, but everything that has value. You shall take and give to the prophets, for they are your high priest. And then the prophets, see what it says? If you don't have a prophet, then you give it to the poor. And then eventually it would become the deacons who gave it to the poor. In the 11th up to 11th century, the offering was closely connected with the sacraments of a Eucharist. It was a gift that was at hand. And in the Middle Ages, this kind of became distorted. This is when Martin Luther was kind of going against the church. It became seen as kind of a balancing of a sin ledger. And the Reformation sought to reclaim the idea that the offering is a response to God's grace, not a response to God's anger. But it is clear that the offering, especially in the very first church, was the essential part of the Christian life, the way that you lived. Now, the particular problems of the monetary offering is it might be uniquely American in some ways, because as you know, in certain European countries, especially Reformation heritage countries, the church is sponsored by the state still, and we have that. What's interesting, though, is even though the church is sponsored by the state and they're given money from the state, and some of their priests are paid for from the state, in the liturgy, they still take up an offering. And that offering goes to the poor, to the needy, to those on the margins. But in the early missionaries in the States, our tradition had to wrestle with the fact that this new nation would not sponsor a state religion, and sponsorship still happens in those other countries. The offering came to support the church more so than support the mission of the church, and we have to wrestle with that reality. But that being said, it's still important because the offering is not just a matter of paying bills, but a matter of stewardship. Stewardship is, this, and I use this all the time, is oikonomos, steward or manager. In John's gospel, we just heard a couple of weeks ago, this is the steward who was in charge of the wine when they run out of the wine at the wedding feast, the manager of the house. And being a steward is a really important piece of the Christian life. How do you steward your household, yourself, your life well? Stewardship is a spiritual practice, as spiritual as giving a sermon, entering a time of prayer, visiting the sick, feeding the hungry. Stewardship is always a call to conversion, because humans are naturally inclined to conserve, to keep, to hold on to build bigger barns, as the parable goes. Stewards are called not to do that, but rather to think wisely and honestly and discern how to live and how to figure out what is enough. Let's look at the offering in the liturgy now. So this is some of the history there, both the history in the American context, but before that, the Didache, and before that, the Hebrew scriptures. But let's look at the offering in the liturgy. And I want to introduce you to one of my favorite people in the world, who is now sainted as the life of the saints. Here are some folks who in my life have taught me generosity. So you can see there, I'm checking my dad's heart right there. That's my father. This was when I was in the play Fiddler on the Roof. I'm the little guy there. That was at my church, by the way. They taught me how to steward relationships well. This is my wife when we were young and full of dreams, and I had hair. Look at that. And then this one is who I want you to be introduced to. This is my grandmother, Grandma Lady. That was her first name. Lady Bess Brown was her name. It's a very Southern name. We're a Southern family. And she's the one who really taught me how to be generous. When Lady Bess Brown died, she had the house in Florida, and they had bought it in 1948 on a GI loan from my grandfather's time in World War II and serving in the Army Air Corps. And we went to clean it out. And in her bedroom and her writing desk, I found her checkbook. And checkbooks are moral documents, like I said before. And in that checkbook, I found out that she had pre-written checks to all of her favorite charities, knowing that she was going to die. And they went to her church, Grace, which is still there in Miami. They went to the Smile Train. She continually gave to that because her godson was born with a cleft palate. And this was one of her favorite charities. And there were gifts for her grandsons because she had been in the habit of supporting us for about $100 a quarter when we were in college. And even though I had already been a pastor for about 6 months by the time she died, in that moment, I relearned what generosity means. Generosity is a taught behavior, just like I said before. We're trained as humans to conserve, to keep. And generosity is a taught behavior. And I'm just curious now, and I'm going to come off sharing, but I'm curious about who taught you to be generous. Who taught you to be generous?
I'm Eliza. I'll echo some from my grandmother as well. She, every Christmas, a couple weeks before the big family festivities, would do she called it a Jesus birthday party and involved a lot of crafts. And then we would always do something looking outward. So we were encouraged to bring money, and then she would match it. And there would be a cause that we would work towards. So I do think about her a lot in that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Eliza. Who taught you to be generous?
I always give my wife a lot of credit. She grew up in a home without a lot of money, but that ambition of being tithers, the idea of giving as a spiritual discipline, a way of challenging yourself to grow and to reach, to give sacrificially. And that became a value in our home when we were, newly married. That it was at my wife's insistence, and I really grew to love it myself. So
Beautiful. Thank you, Nate. Who taught you to be generous?
When I think about generosity, I think like I'm stuck in the outside of like finances because growing up I didn't have a lot of money. But watching my dad like just give time and effort, like anytime somebody asked him for help, he was there. And the follow through and like just that like blue collar work ethic. Like you go to work to support your people. And if you don't have money, there's other ways to support your people by showing up and manual labor and like building things. And I don't know. I don't have those skills, but the spirit of that generosity, like I'm not going to build you a driveway, but I'll be there to watch if you need somebody to help. So just that the giving of self as opposed to stuff has gone a long way.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Andy. Anybody else? Who taught you to be generous?
I think it's my mom. I think it's born out of her generosity, but also like her lack of attachment to stuff. But I just remember how often like, oh, didn't we used to have one of those? She's like, oh yeah, someone else needed it, so I just gave it to them, right? And like all the time, like where'd that platter go? Oh, someone needed a platter, so they just have it now, and just like didn't, right? And so I just this like freely giving away, like someone else needed it, so and how ingrained that now is into me, right? Like, oh, someone else needs something. If I have it, sure, right?
Yeah, that's great. No, I love these because here's the thing. If we can share our generosity stories, we can tap into the generative nature, the learned characteristic that we can both emulate and exemplify in our lives. And ideally, the offering is the moment in the liturgy where you get to respond to God's generosity in a generous way. That's ideally what it should be. And here's a question that haunts me at night at 3:32 in the a.m. And that's, who's going to say that I taught them to be generous? You know? See, the offering is a moment in the liturgy where we get to practice generosity that is necessary as disciples, and is a response to the word of God. God has graciously given to us, and so we get to respond in grace. And the gospel calls us not to atone for ourselves, but to help our neighbor. The offering provides a way of participation, and you can always pull it back to stories of mission where their generosity, the people's generosity of giving of their time, of giving their space, of giving of their platters, however it is, has changed somebody's life. See, we need a new lens. We need a new lens to place on generosity, because we have, I think, for too long imagined that this was a way that the church paid bills, instead of a way that Christians get to live into their calling to be disciples and respond to the world in a generous way. The offering is not meant to pay your bills, beloved. The offering is meant to change your life, to give you an opportunity to respond to God's grace. We've talked a little bit about a number of things right now. I'm curious, what's one thing that's new to you? What's one thing that you want to hear more about? And what's one thing that you're still not sure you buy into?
I'm just confused on how we make offering a way to respond to God's grace during the worship service when people aren't able to put anything in the plate.
I'm going to talk about that in just a second. I appreciate that. But yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to push back on one thing, though, and I'll say this. Remember that everyone can put something into something. And so if we just imagine the plate as being the only receptacle for offering, we've short-sighted ourselves. But even that, there are stories in the scripture where people giving out of their poverty do great things. Everyone can give something in some sort of way. It may not always be now, and it may not always be regularly, but it can be sometimes. Right?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, absolutely. But some people run from the offering plates. I mean, I've seen it.
Yeah, and I think some people run from the offering plate for a couple of different reasons. I'll chat about that in just a second. We're going to get to how we do it in the liturgy for sure, as long as we're kind of clear on how it functions in the liturgy. But what's something new? What's something you want to hear more about, or what's something that you're really not sure if that's true from what you've heard so far?
Tim, the part that I've just been wrestling with and going around in my mind about and I totally, it resonates with me. The story that you told about, the person you knew who was a bully and now gives to the Trevor Project as in some way that's a means of atonement, but I'm trying to figure out how that, of course, you have to reconcile that with that deep Lutheranism as well, but and how that might be distinct or is distinct from the third thing you said about giving, that it connects you to that which is your priority. I mean, in some ways, those are, to me, they seem like two different sides of the same coin, but it might be that I guess I'm just I don't really necessarily have a question, but just wanted to name that's been percolating in my head since you said it.
Yeah, that's great, Nate. I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, all those three reasons that they gave are very connected in some sort of form or fashion, especially in the Hebrew scriptures. One of the reasons I bring that up is I really think they resonate with me on reasons that I give, or they could resonate in churches to elevate the conversation around the offering in ways that haven't been done like this before. They can be conversation starters, just kind of like what you were bringing up there. Because as we were saying at the very beginning, one of the problems with churches is they don't even bring up the offering at all. This isn't talked about ever. What are some ways that we can elevate the conversation around it? Anyone else on something that was new to you, something you want to hear more about, or something you're not quite sure about?
I'm intrigued with the talking about the offering as a way of drawing close, and I'm thinking about that in the sense of those of us who give online, right, automatically, and so like we don't, right, with the thing goes past us, and I like always just hate that I can't write something to put in, but I just wonder like that naming that specifically. I don't know. I'm like I don't know if I'm right, still percolating, but like naming that connection, like thank you for your online offering, right, as a way of showing your commitment to this ministry or whatever. But I see a connection in how to talk about online giving in a different way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Deacon. This past Christmas Eve, I was at a service here in Raleigh. My family went to a church, and we hop around to a couple of different ones depending on who's preaching and where I am and whatnot. And I had forgotten to write a check. My grandmother did not instill that checkbook in me, but they had a QR code, and I was able to do that. And I remember my father leaning over to me. He said, "If you don't have anything, I can put something in." I was like, "No, I already gave online." He said, "Oh, because I didn't see you put anything in." I was like, "Yeah, I imagine that's how a lot of folks feel right now. How do we name that? How do we be honest about that?" Because, well, Jesus says, by the way, that where your treasure is, there your heart is also, which is that third thing of the carbonate. I mean, I don't think that Jesus made that up. I think Jesus was taught that in Jewish school. He was a good Jewish boy. So this is a truism, right? Well, let's move specifically to how we can do this differently in the liturgy, or how we can do it mindfully is probably more like it. All right, sound good? So I'm going to share a little bit more here. All right. In the liturgy, if God has given to us graciously, we get to respond with grace. The gospel calls us not to atone, and the offering provides for a way for us to do that. And we can do it by recognizing that we're in a little bit of a different shift now. And I talk about these almost every webinar I do just to lay things out. There's the traditional paradigm and there's the emerging paradigm. And one is not old and one is not new. One is not bad, one is not good. They both just are. And I would say that they're cyclical. For instance, I've said this a number of times as well, but in 1920, the same percentage of Americans were in the pew as they are today. In the 1920s, the same percentage of Americans were in the pew as they are today. Now, none of us think that way because even the oldest in our churches now can only think back to the 1940s or the 1950s when church attendance skyrocketed. And it skyrocketed because we had a post-World War II bump in good feelings, good vibes, and that's when we put "In God We Trust" on our money, and civic life and religious life held hands. But that's all to say that we've gone through peaks and waves, valleys and troughs, and crests throughout human history and throughout American history when it comes to church attendance and participation. And we forget this. We need to remember this. But those who remember the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and even some folks in the 70s are usually normally talking about a traditional paradigm. And so church attendance and church giving is a moral obligation. And your duty is to do this to support the church. Where does the offering go? It doesn't matter. You're supporting the church. It's a theology of duty. And the institution, the church itself, is very, very central, and you can trust it. You can trust it. And institutions are autonomous. Once that money is given to them, they can do whatever they want. But we have an emerging paradigm that we're actually operating in now. And this is specifically true for late Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Zs. And the emerging paradigm, which was really highlighted and the gas pedal was pushed during the pandemic, by the way, when every institution failed. In the pandemic, every institution failed, including the church. And so the emerging paradigm is not about moral obligation, but about donor cultivation. You want me to participate? Why do you need me? Why do you need me? Me. And instead of a theology of duty, you do this. It's a theology of grace, opportunity. You get to do this. Wouldn't it be great to do this? Wouldn't it be great to change the world? You get to do this instead of you have to do this. And instead of the institution being the important part, it's the person who's the important part. You have the ability to impact somebody's life by God. And so institutions need to earn trust because they're collaborating with the donors and where they're going and what's happening and how they're changing lives. If the offering is meant to be a time where Christians get to practice discipleship by responding to the grace of God, then the offering time gets to be a moment in the liturgy when stories of that grace are told. This is, I think, the great offering that we have right now, the great opportunity that we have right now during the offering. What unique thing does your church do to change lives? I want you to think about it right now. What are the unique things that your church does to change lives? And I'm going to give you an example. So we're at the point of the liturgy right now, and where the offering is being collected, and the plates are going around. And I just want you to know I'm really grateful for the faithfulness of this congregation, because this last week, somebody came to the door and they couldn't pay their electric bill. And because of what you're doing, we were able to help them. Thank you. Now that took 20 seconds. But directly connected between the actions of the offering and a life changed was a story that bridged the gap. This can happen every week, because every week a story like that is happening. It can happen every week. Now let's imagine that you're a church who doesn't pass the offering plate anymore because of COVID-19. You didn't do that anymore. Most people give online, like Deacon Aaron said, right? So the offering plate is at the back. So the pastor is up at the front and she says, "We're really grateful for the time that you have here. You've heard the amazing word of grace. We have a couple of stations around the church right now for the offering. The first is the offering plate at the back. If you'd like to support the ministries, and there are various ways that happens. You can see in your bulletin the stories of lives changed by the work that we do here. We invite you to go to that station. Over the side over here, we have a sign up for volunteers for VBS this next summer. And we're looking for a couple of people to sign up their names and help. And if you think that God has given you the grace and the ability to work with kids, or if other people have told you that this is true about you, please just visit our attendant over there who's signing people up and chat with them, and then prayerfully consider putting your name there. We're also doing this legislation advocacy for our immigrant brothers and sisters for safe housing. And you can hit that station that's right over here. And then if you'd like to offer prayers, we have a prayer station up at the front. And we're going to take the next 7 minutes and enter it to a time of offering. In this moment, everybody gets to do what the offering in the liturgy is designed to do: offer a moment of thanks. They can do it by putting their offering in. They can do it by signing legislation. They can do it by signing up for volunteering. They can do it by offering prayer. They can do all of them. And in fact, what you do in subsequent weeks is you get stories from people who participate in this way on why they do what they do. And you tell those during the offering time. And the choir gets to sing a cool anthem still. The organ gets to do some cool organizing, right? but you've directly connected the mission of the church with the offering, so that folks who give online still have something they can do during the offering, right? Folks who love to put the offering envelope in the plate get to do it, and they don't have to hide to do it. They can do it publicly because some of them want to show that they offer, they support, right? People have a time to sign up, so it's not relegated someplace in the narthex where nobody hits it, right? And when you do this, and you ask, your children or your children's children, what's the offering for? There's no question. They know what it's for. It's for giving prayers. It's for volunteering. It's for changing lives through legislation. It's changing lives through giving of your gifts. When this happens, you get to involve the whole church in ways that they've not been involved before too. It can become a high point in your ministry, not because it's the most exciting thing, but it certainly is a thing that connects folks with the work that you're doing and the lives being changed. And I'll tell you one more thing, and then I'll take questions or thoughts or anything on this. Connecting it through the carbonate or to the carbonate, connecting it to the didache, connecting it to who taught you to be generous. When you get to do all of these things through discipleship programs, through adult education programs, even through conversations at congregational meetings. I mean, imagine that you start out your congregational meeting not with, here's this year's budget, here's last year's budget, but instead you start off with, I want to tell you who taught me to be generous. And you tell that story, and then you say, so I'm curious now if you could tell each other who taught you to be generous and have them share. Imagine the mood change that would happen in a congregational meeting. From a moment of, scarcity, which is looking at budgets, to a moment of generosity, which is telling the inspirational story of how you have been changed because of somebody else's generosity. They taught you to do that. And then asking that seminal question, and who's going to say you taught them to be generous? All right, we got 9 minutes left. So I'm happy to open it up for questions or thoughts or reflections, anything that you might want here.
I have a question back to the online giving. I've been in various places, and we have the old pews that have like the little envelope slots where you can, pull them or whatever. Not that they get used. I mean, people use the envelopes for sure, but how? And I've been at churches where they have like, I gave online card, so you could pull it out of the back of the pew and like put it in the plate, just the same as if you were doing an envelope of money.
Yeah.
Is that? I mean, I don't know how many people actually give online at my church, but they're all older as well, and so it's like older folks using online giving, which is a thing. You can take what you will from that, but like still giving them the ability to visually and physically contribute. Is that something you would suggest exploring? Or
I would put them in. I'd laminate them so you can collect them at the end of worship every year or every week and put them back in. The ushers can certainly do that, or office administration or whoever volunteers you might want. It does give folks a way to contribute. I'd also say, if you still pass out the plates, which it sounds like you do, I would say something at the very beginning, connected to the mission, and then say, and a number of us in this community give online. We're really grateful for that. If you're curious about how to give online, there's information at the back of your bulletin on how to set that up. So you name it explicitly, giving thanks to them to be able to do that. And then invite folks into doing that. I mean, the more you talk about it, the more you elevate the conversation around it, the better. Yeah.
I would just name another dynamic that we're seeing a lot of in our congregation is anybody that's older than 70 and a half and has to take those mandatory IRA withdrawals, we see a lot of folks that will honor their whole commitment for the year with a single gift.
Yeah.
And these are extraordinary checks that come in, and we've had to be real, agile about, recognizing that that's a way that people want to give. We've redesigned our commitment cards in many ways, but I really like some of the things that you've talked about here with ways to continue to engage those folks, but also to be able to talk purposefully to say, those of you who've given through a one-time IRA gift, these are the ministries that are just a reminder. These are the ministries you're impacting with that. And here's some other ways you can continue to be generous too. So,
yeah, thank you, Nate. Yeah. If folks are given through their RMDs, required minimum distributions, they absolutely should get a personalized card from the pastor for sure. And I would say probably from another council member as well, not the treasurer, another council member. And then I would say get a story from one of them. Why did they decide to do that? Or get a story on what are they excited about at your church, which made them want to do that. Because when you can get a testimony from somebody on why they're being generous, that generosity spurs on other people's generosity. And that's a perfect story to tell during that offering moment. Perfect story. And they'll say, well, I'd love for it to be anonymous. And you can say, I totally understand that. I will honor that if you want, but I really want to encourage you not to be anonymous. And this is why. Your generosity will move other people to generosity. Other thoughts or questions or reflections on making the offering a high point, not the high point, a high point in the liturgy? And did I answer the thing? What do we do with folks if they don't feel like they have anything they can put in a plate? Okay. There are other ways to do it. And there are other things to offer. And I'll just take one more moment to say, and part of this can come back to, you can do a 4-week discipleship course on stewardship, on what it means to be a steward. And it's a life thing, not just a pocketbook thing. All of our beings are moral documents, our mouths, our hands, our buildings, our homes, our checkbooks. These are all moral documents. How are we being called to use them? Final thoughts? You may hear some of these stories again at the Senate Assembly, by the way, just because, because they're important, they're good stories, and they're meanmeaningful to me. But
no problem. Most folks here are in northwestern Minnesota, so they won't hear them again. So it's great.
Oh, great. Well, good. Then perfect. I mean, unless I come to northwest Minnesota, which could happen too. But yeah. Any other final things, or Aaron, is there anything you want clarity on that you're feeling?
No, this is great. Thank you. Andy, you had something?
Well, I know there's not enough time to like dive into this, but how would you connect? So in our church, we do the pass piece into offering.
Yeah.
Is that like, how do you draw a deeper connection to that move? Because like in my head, like everything we've said is like tracking with how I think about things, but like the culture of the church is not in my head. But then the idea of the peace is the reconciliation to others before the offering. Biblically, like that's the narrative that, it's like if you have any problems, go solve them first, and then I'll take your stuff.
Well, then you're invited to share. But
right.
Remember the peace. This is great too. I love this. So remember, the peace is a moment of stewardship. It's stewardship of relationships. That's what the peace is intended for. It's to steward the relationships internally in the church well. You know, the whole arc. I mean, you could do a whole cool like adult education thing on this, right? This is all about stewardship. I mean, you hear the gospel and then you get these moments to respond. You steward your relationships well, you mend bridges, you deepen connections, you steward your things and your time well with the offering, and then you get to experience the grace of God well with the table. You hear it, you respond, you experience it, you go out, you live it, you come back, you hear it again, you respond, you experience it, you go out and live it. This is the breath of the liturgy. This is the breath of the church world. This is what it all means. And I will say, this is not often taught in seminaries in ways that I wish it was. So we can do it now.
Thank you, Tim, for being with us. And this is great. I already have like 5 videos I'm going to make from this video, so that's great. So thank you for offering this. Folks, just for FYI, you're welcome to, if you have other topics you want us to cover, send myself or Pastor Rebel an email. Our next one is going to be led with Pastor Rebel. It's April 1st. And it's called Beyond the Offering Plate, Other Ways to Fund Your Ministry. So that'll be April 1st. So we're letting Tim off the hook next round, and Rebel will offer her wisdom. And thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thank you. And just one more thing, my email, tim.brown@elca.org. Feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much for inviting me, Aaron, and I'll see you guys again.